I'm recording my homily for the 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time in 2018. For my day off, I was able to get away. It's been a while since I've been able to get away. And so my great-grandparents built a cabin on San Juan Island almost 80 years ago, maybe 75 years ago. And so I come up here every once in a while. This is Young Hill. So if you ever want to come up here, you just park near on the road where the trailhead is, right by the British camp, and it's just one of the most beautiful places for sunsets. So the gospel this weekend, Jesus tells his disciples, he says, okay, when you guys go out, I don't want you to take any money. I don't want you to take a second pair of clothes. I don't want you to take any luggage. I don't want, a sack. So I don't want you to take any of that stuff. And it sounds very odd, since as soon as we take a trip, those are exactly the things that we take, right? We make sure we have some money, and we have some food, and we have a sack, luggage and extra clothes and all those things. And so he tells them not to take any of those things. And I think it would have been as odd back then as it was now, that you want to be prepared when you go on a journey. So why did he want his disciples to not be prepared? Why did he want them to be completely vulnerable, to not even have any food? Well, I think there's a couple reasons, right? So the first is, I think Jesus always wanted his church to be poor. Obviously, varying degrees of that, but I think he always wanted us to have a sense that the poor and the abandoned and the vulnerable and the suffering would never ever feel like they didn't belong. That if there was any place that those people would feel like they belonged to, would be his church. And I truly hope that is the case. Sometimes it's frustrating when it seems like some of our avenues, our ministries that help people in those situations, our hospitals and social services and such, are so distant now from the parish life or the spiritual side, or they say they can't promote the faith because they accept government funds, et cetera, that it's not necessarily even an avenue back to Jesus per se. It's great work, but it's not bringing people to the gospel. So anyways, I think he always wanted the church, the spiritual body, to be a place, a home, a dwelling a refuge where people who are hurt can go. Now, I think the other reason is this, because Jesus knows our human nature, that if I have money and I want to go somewhere, I'm going to, and it's time to find a place to stay for the night, and I have money, I'm going to go to a hotel, right? And generally speaking, I'm going to go to a hotel that I can afford. So whether it's nice or whether it's cheap, I'm going to go to what I can afford. The same is true with a restaurant. If I can afford to buy food, I'll just go to a restaurant and eat. But if I have no money, I have no place to stay, then what? Well, guess what? I have to talk to people. I have to go knock on somebody's door. I have to ask for help. I have to interact. I have to make connections with people. And that's what Jesus wanted. He wanted to make sure his disciples were always making connections with people, that they were always going to be present to the stranger. Now think about it. In your town where you live, who are the most recognizable people in the entire town? It's the homeless people. It's the guy who stands in Marysville. It's the guy who stands at the off-ramp and is waving, right? Everybody knows the homeless guy who's waving at the off-ramp. And so people see us when we're out and about, when we're present, right? So if I don't have my own home, then I have to be constantly interacting with other people. That's the geniusness, I think, of Jesus telling his disciples that, so they would always have to interact. That's why he goes in the gospel and tells them about staying with someone, right? Okay, all right. He's just guaranteeing the gospel gets spread. Okay, now, today I want to talk a little bit about what seems to be impossible, but is possible when bringing the gospel to people. Now, one example was the gospel. It seems impossible to go out into the world with no money, with no luggage, with no nothing, but it's possible. We can do it if we want to do it. We can interact with people if we want to interact. We can love the stranger if we want to do that. But it's hard, right? Our default is not necessarily to do that. So, I'm going to go into a little bit about the difficulties there and some people that overcame them, but also some situations that seem impossible but can be possible. Okay? All right, first the impossible. So the president of the Philippines, what's his name? Rodrigo, I think. The president of the Philippines, who's enormously popular in the Philippines. I did a little research a couple days ago, and the latest survey that showed his approval ratings in the Philippines was that 88% of the people approve of his leadership. 88%. We have not had a president that has 88% approval ratings in, I don't know how long, ever. Right? I mean, that's incredible. He's enormously popular. Only 3% of the people said they disapprove. So there was a chunk who just kind of hadn't made up their mind. But that's incredible. You think he's just a phenomenal leader based on that. And I do think he has some good leadership skills. He likes to get things done. And I think people in the Philippines like that. He also hates corruption. And so I think the people in the Philippines also like that. However, he also hates the Catholic Church. He despises the Catholic Church. Now, he's Catholic. Well, I'm sure he would deny that now, but he's baptized, so he's Catholic. And he was raised in the Catholic faith. But he despises the Catholic Church. Now, from his perspective as president, he considers the Catholic Church to be a threat to his authority because the Catholic Church is constantly offering commentary on his tactics and some of the immoral things that he's doing. And he doesn't back down. He doesn't capitulate at all. He's defiant, absolutely defiant. He hates the Catholic Church. There's nothing good about the Catholic Church. Now, last week he came out and he said to the people, because this is rather clever on his part. If he hates the Catholic Church, then obviously he's going to want to get everybody else to hate the Catholic Church too. And if he can get them to do that, then they won't listen to the bishops or the priests, right? So he came out last week and he said, if anyone can prove that God exists, all right, listen to that. If anyone can prove that God exists, he will step down from his leadership. It is an open challenge to the bishops, to priests, to Catholics, to all Catholics. It is a challenge to say, if you can prove that God exists, I will step down from leadership. Now, the thing is, so in the last few weeks, he's gotten himself into a little bit of trouble. I don't know if his approval ratings would be quite so high right now. But what he's basically doing to the Philippines people is he's saying, you either follow those bishops, you follow the Pope, you follow God, or you follow me. But you can't follow both. And so he's giving his people an ultimatum. Now, fascist leaders do this because they can't stand competition. They don't work well with other leaders. They consider everybody else a threat to their authority, and so they do stuff like this. Hitler was one who would do stuff like this. You're all in or you're all out, right? And so the president of the Philippines is doing that. Now, what would you do? Let's say you were friends with him. You're a trusted confidant. What would you say to him? If he said, if you can prove God exists, I will step down from power. I will step down as president. I mean, that's a pretty radical statement. Now, obviously, I don't think he's really open to hearing anybody's arguments, especially if they were arguments from a philosophical perspective or a theological perspective. He's not going to listen to any of that. That's not where the problem is, right? The problem is not the mind. The problem is in the heart. And so what do you say? Because it seems impossible. It's like he's so defiant. How could you bring him to know God? Or would we just give up? I don't think we give up. Because if we give up on him, we have to give up on everybody. Last week I talked about Mother Teresa, and when Mother Teresa first went to Calcutta and she was going to start her ministry of reaching out to the abandoned and the poor, she said that if she walked by one person who was lying on the street who needed help, if she walked by one person who needed help, then she would be able to walk by everybody. If we dismiss the president's need for God, then we're going to dismiss everyone in the Philippines' need for God. And then he's going to take over. Now, I don't think that's what he wants deep down, but he's wounded, he's hurt. How does a person get from being raised Catholic to hating the Catholic faith? Well, I'll get back to that in a second. You know, Mother Teresa, last week I talked about her, and I talked about this dark night of the soul, and so in the dark night of the soul, for 50 years, she felt like God had abandoned her. And it's very uncomfortable for us to ponder that or think about that or to think that that was the reality, but that's how she felt. Now that was the power of Jesus working, though. This wasn't Satan. This wasn't something bad. God was giving Mother Teresa the ability to know what it feels like to be the one, just like the ones whom she served. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be forgotten. And yes, it felt that way. She was feeling that way by God, but what it did was it impelled her to feel united to the people whom she was suffering, or whom were suffering. She was not this wealthy person coming to help the poor. She was one of them. She was a fellow abandoned person helping abandoned people. She was poor spiritually in the sense that she was not being given consolation in her prayer. To reach out to those who were also distant from God in their prayer. It's quite ingenious if you think about it. It's kind of like Jesus saying, don't take anything with you. In other words, bring a dark night with you, bring spiritual darkness with you so that you can be a brother or a sister to those whom you serve. And yet we rebel against that dark night, but Jesus invites us into it, because that's where we unite ourselves to those who are abandoned. Well, President of the Philippines is also one of the abandoned. He's one who's distant from God right now. And so we should be able to bring the gospel to him and to not be afraid of his challenge, but to actually say, okay, Lord, let me pray about this. How would I deal with this? What would I say to him? 2 days ago, we celebrated the feast day of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. She's the first Native American who was canonized a saint. She lived in upstate New York, obviously where her tribe lived. And there were a number of different tribes in the area. Many of them were often warring with each other. I should say some of them were warring with each other. Others were friendly. The Mohawks in particular, when their numbers started to be ravaged by the diseases that were being brought by the white man, they would go out and conquer other tribes in order to repopulate, if you will, their tribe. And so St. Kateri's father was a Mohawk chief, and his wife was one of these women who had been captured. And so St. Kateri grows up in that context. At least briefly she did. When she was 4 years old, both of her parents died from smallpox, as well as her little baby brother. And so she grows up she's raised by extended family. Now, in the midst of this, she begins to encounter the Catholic faith. And she takes to it like fish to water. She just loves it. It fills her heart, it fills her soul. It was only natural while she was growing up, though, that her family wanted her to marry, to have a family. That's what everybody did. It wasn't natural to not get married, but she very early on knew that God wanted her to consecrate her life. And so she did not want to get married. Now, on average in the Catholic Church, we say, I heard this once, I think it was Father Thomas Dubay who said it in one of his books, but on average 1% of the population has a religious vocation, to be a priest or a sister or a brother, about 1%. So that's not a lot, but Kateri felt very much called to that. She was called to this consecrated life. So she did not want to get married, and she remained steadfast in that. And her family finally gave in and allowed her to pursue that. But she was a young girl. I want to talk about just her life and what seems like the impossibility that she could become a spiritual hero to so many people. You know, even today, for the Native Americans, she presents hope where there's often fracture and woundedness between the Catholic Church and the Native Americans. She brings hope. And so when she was 4, she also contracted smallpox, and it left her deeply scarred. Her face was scarred from the pox, and it was her whole face. And so when she was younger, she was very bashful. She was very insecure because of this. They said in the village, they said that she would often walk around with like a towel or a piece of cloth over her head so that nobody could see her face. She was also almost blinded by the smallpox. She was partially blind. And so her name actually, Tekekwitha, means one who bumps into things. And it wasn't a very complimentary name because of her partial blindness. So here you have a person who's basically looked down upon, you know, could easily be abandoned in some sense, and yet she becomes a spiritual hero. How did that happen? Well, to make it even worse, consider the relationship between white man, the French, and the natives. Well, white man brings all these diseases, right? And virtually, starts wiping out the population of the natives. So the natives are not going to necessarily be open to hearing the religion of the white man, right? But also, when the French would come in, what they would do in some instances is, if they wanted a piece of land and the natives were already there, they would basically kick the natives out of their village and then burn the village to the ground. And they would do that so that they wouldn't come back. And it was very cruel. But it's like, why would you follow a religion of a group that burned your village to the ground? Well, the Jesuits who came from France were trying to repair and heal some of the damage that had been done by their confreres, and they tried to bring Jesus. Now, in very difficult circumstances, many of them were martyred because of that. But it was because of their love that they were able to accomplish the impossible. And Kateri became one of the keys to that. Her heart was open, she was humbled, she was wounded, she perhaps even felt abandoned. And so her heart was open to see Jesus, a God who had been abandoned, a God who had been left to die on a cross. She would have been able to have just related to that so easily, right? You see the connections there, the beauty of that God, when he gave his life as one who was abandoned, he made the impossible possible. And nobody would ever feel like that they were too low to come to embrace him. They would always be able to feel like he was their brother. And so Saint Kateri becomes one of those people who sets an example for her people to be able to see Jesus as God. And so it is possible. Now I want to get back to the President of the Philippines. How do you reach somebody who's really broken? Well, we heard about Mother Teresa. We know about Saint Kateri. We know about countless other examples. One of my favorites, Saint Damien of Molokai ministering to the lepers. Saint Francis of Assisi. Just countless saints. But how do we reach somebody like the President of the Philippines? Well, the snarky side of me, the rebellious side of me, the not very loving side of me, would go to someone like that and say, well, you want me to prove that God exists? Well, can you prove that he doesn't exist? If you can prove he doesn't exist, I will step down as a priest. I will leave the priesthood. That's kind of the snarky side. That's not the loving side of me, right? I think it's a valid argument. Say, hey, if you're so adamant, prove he doesn't exist. And it's because the reality is he can't, right? In fact, the harder he would try, the more he would end up proving that there's things in our world that are intangible and that cannot be explained by even science, right? Okay, so speaking of that, here's what I would say, or at least I would try, and who knows where this would go. But you have to take into the context the president's life. And so The president of the Philippines, when he was running for election, he said that when he was a boy, when he was a Catholic, just a young boy, a priest sexually abused him. Now, just by saying that, and I have no reason to doubt the validity of that, does it make sense that he could hate the Catholic Church so much? That he could see the Catholic Church as being corrupt, hypocritical, dangerous even? Absolutely. He was completely violated by the one institution that should have loved him and protected him. Instead, he became a victim of a predator. Now, how do you help him encounter Jesus? So here's what I would say. I would say, President, I don't know how he goes by. I want you to prove to me that your mother existed, that your mom existed. I want you to prove to me your mom existed. Now, let's say he's up for the challenge. Let's say he's curious, right? Let's say he's up for a little dialogue. And so he says, all right, sure. So he brings in a picture of his mom. I'm assuming that she's probably passed away because he's older. So he brings in a picture of his mom and says, here's my mom. And maybe even he's in the picture as a little boy, and you say, oh, okay. It's a picture of a woman. But prove to me that this woman is your mom. Now, let's say he says, well, I've got family members who say that she was my mom. And it's like, okay, but how do I know they're telling me the truth? Prove to me, beyond reasonable doubt, prove to me that she is your mom and that she existed. So let's say he goes the route of science, right? Because we all love science. And so he uses DNA to prove that she is his mom. And so by DNA, and so let's say I accept the evidence of the DNA and say, okay, what it proves is biologically, yes, this woman gave birth to you. She gave birth to you. But prove to me that she is your mom. Because we know that giving birth is very, very important in the mother relationship, but that's not the end of it. That's not necessarily what defines motherhood in many ways. Prove to me that she is your mom. Now, if he were to think about it a little bit, he'd realize that what I'm asking is, prove to me that she is the one who did what all good moms do. That she gave her life for him. She gave her life day in and day out. She made tons of sacrifices for him. She gave up things for him. She spent countless hours loving him. And I'm assuming you'd have some siblings in them as well. Right? And so everything that he would describe, and I could ask questions of him about it to prove that this is his mom. And the more that he would get into the ways that she loved him, the more we could point at the cross and show him that he's really not that far from Jesus. And nor was his mom, that she was actually very close. And everything that he would value in her, everything that he would miss now in her, he would see in the example of Jesus Christ. That motherhood on so many levels, and I'm not saying this to the exclusion of fatherhood, but motherhood on so many levels is truly a beautiful manifestation of God's love. And then you could take that in so many different ways. You could say, is this what you want for your people? Do you want them to know that kind of security and love and safety and well-being? Because when you look at how he's leading his country right now, he's not necessarily doing that. He's using fear. He's using intimidation. He's killing the criminals. He's using kind of mafia-style tactics. And so in that, he's using what he knows to produce results, but he's not using love. He's not appealing to his people in love. He's he's spreading his woundedness. He's creating more wounded people. And he's trying to find a way to protect his country and his people. And they like that about him. But there's still something missing. And he's inflicting that on a lot of people. If you disagree with me on how to approach this, I'd love to hear kind of what you think. Because I think it's an important question, because the president of the Philippines is not any different than most of the people in our world today. And yet there's Jesus Christ, also abandoned on the cross, who's always available, and he can make the impossible possible. All right. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.